You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and today I'm hanging out with Josh Dech. Josh is an ex-paramedic, holistic nutritionist, and medical lecturer specializing in one of my all-time favorite topics, gut health, with a focus on Crohn's and colitis. He hosts a podcast where he interviews some of the world's renowned doctors and health experts, discussing things like how our gut bacteria are more important than our DNA. Understanding this topic is so important because your gut health determines your productivity, emotions, mental clarity, ability to learn, quality of your sleep, and the list goes on and on. Josh, welcome to the show.
Heather, thanks for having me. That's quite the introduction to the gut. That's just scratching the surface. I'm really excited about this.
Just the tip of the iceberg, huh?
Just barely. The gut is so remarkable. It is woven in everything. And I love that you brought up that it might be more important than our DNA. Because I've said that before, and some people get kind of fighty about it. But the truth is, it even influences your DNA. It's really, really quite remarkable.
It almost is like if you're super interested in getting to the root cause of maybe I'm going out on a limb here. Almost anything you can experience as a human, you might want to start with your gut.
100%. It's not a stretch at all. There's actually a paper by Dr. Alessio Fasano, and it says all diseases begin in the leaky gut. And it's titled, All Diseases Begin in the Leaky Gut, the Role of Zonulin-Mediated Gut Permeability in the Pathogenesis of Some Chronic Inflammatory Diseases. And so to break that down for those who aren't in like medical school, what that means is all diseases begin in the leaky gut. They're talking about the role of a protein called zonulin, which is produced in leaky gut. And so zonulin mediates or creates gut permeability, so it's like a cheesecloth, in the pathogenesis or the creation of chronic inflammatory diseases. And so what they basically draw in the conclusion is you'd be hard pressed to find any, and it's bold, capital letters, underlined, any disease not connected to a leaky gut.
Okay, so I have two things I want to unpack there, but the first is leaky gut. There may be some people listening who have never heard that phrase.
That's right. So let's talk about leaky gut. So your gut is a remarkable piece of, we'll call it technology, so to speak, biological technology. It's absolutely incredible. And so your small intestine and your large intestine are really where things will permeate through, moving back and forth, right? Because your stomach, it's really contained. Things don't really absorb in the stomach. There's like three things that will, but everything else absorbs into your body through either the small intestine or the large intestine. Now, the small intestine and the large intestine, directly outside of those, you're going to have what we call your MALT or your GALT. So your gut-associated lymphoid tissue, that's your lymphatic tissue. And we're also going to have your bloodstream. You can have a lot of blood supply there. And so when things want to pass through naturally in a healthy way from your intestines to get into your blood as they're breaking down, your body's absorbing them. That's how we absorb food and nutrients. It goes into our blood. But they have to be broken down into itty bitty microscopic molecules, tiny, tiny things. But it's only one cell between your small intestine to getting into your blood. So it's this really fine-tuned piece of, like I said, technology where things will open up. They'll pass through this one cell barrier, getting into your blood and traveling around the body. It's two cells in your large intestine. Well, so it's leaky gut. It's already so thin. Well, all your cells are stitched together. Think of it like having these little stitches. We call them gap junctions. What they do is they hold these cells together nice and tight. Well, the challenge is when we become inflamed and this zonulin protein is created and we start to get these leaks in the gut, those gap junctions that are like glue, right? If you picture them almost like little stitches holding together, like an Afghan or a quilt, right? They're holding these together. And then the leaks, they open up and the stitches come apart. And so now instead of things going through the normal passageway, like border security, going through these membranes, they go in through the leaks and the cracks. And the longer you are inflamed, the more inflamed you are, the greater the size of the leak. And so what happens now, instead of things being broken down to molecules to pass through cell membranes to get into your blood, they're actually opening up and passing between the cells, and they're larger than they should be. And so they create immune responses and inflammation. They travel around the body, creating toxic responses, and the toxins and pathogens and all kinds of stuff can leak out through a leaky gut into your blood.
So what would be some of the common things that you may experience if you have a leaky gut?
You can experience just about anything. And this is where it gets really tricky, because I know people want to say, well, how do I know I have leaky gut? If you're bloated, you probably got leaky gut. If you have constipation, diarrhea, nausea when you're eating, if you have any sort of abnormalities, cramping, pain, gas, etc., you probably have leaky gut. If you're someone who consumes alcohol or fast food, fried food, artificial foods, any like hot dogs, anything packaged that's not, basically if your great-great-great-grandmother would not recognize it as food and you eat it, you probably have leaky gut to some degree. But it's just a severity spectrum. Is it really, really bad and you're super inflamed, these big, massive leaks? Or is it just a little bit where you might have some kind of symptom? And so those can present like 72%, up to 72% of Americans complain of gut issues once a week, being bloating, gas, constipation, pain, diarrhea, or something else. And so that's up to 72% of people who have a known gut symptom, which is leaky gut. But then there's the rest of those who might have leaky gut but don't realize it. ADHD, anxiety, depression, psoriasis, eczema, arthritis, asthma. Any of these things can also come from the gut. And so if you have any kind of health condition, not even a diagnosis, because a lot of us wait for a clinical diagnosis to go, here's my criteria for why I'm ill. And I have a huge point of contention with all of that in the Western medicine world. But the short of it is, if you have any kind of condition where you go, oh, I wish this was a little better. I wish my teeth weren't as sensitive. Your body could be drawing minerals from your teeth to support it because your gut's leaky and there's inflammation. So anything can be connected to a leaky gut. I apologize to the listeners for such a vague, ridiculous response.
And of course, the question that would logically follow is how to heal it. But I'm not going to go there yet. I want to kind of wrap back around to when you first started talking about the leaky gut or gut issues being the root cause. Before we started recording, I asked you about the vagus nerve because many of my listeners know I'm a huge fan of the vagus nerve.
Yes.
And you said something so profound. You're like, well, hang on. If we know walking is good for you, but your leg is broken, maybe we're a step ahead. And so I love...
Nice pun.
I love this. I love personally learning from all my podcast guests, but this idea of, hey, yeah, your vagus nerve and toning your vagus nerve is really important, but let's dial it back. Let's get to this foundation of establishing a healthy gut. Now, I know from having listened to some of your podcast episodes, there's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. Everyone's gut is very unique and individualized. Mm-hmm. So I can't ask you, hey, how do we fix this? Right. But I can ask you, are there some habits that you help people adopt that maybe assist a healthier gut or promote a healthier gut?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many ways. And I want to address that vagus nerve for the listeners so we don't confuse too much. It's always a good thing. If you had to pick a pecking order, I can only do 3 things. I only have the bandwidth or the time or the focus to be able to remember to do X things. The vagus nerve isn't my first. It's like saying, are multivitamins and mineral supplements important? I absolutely believe so. But if you're not eating a clean diet, you're doing yourself a disservice. So there are things that may be more important, but if you can eat a good diet and take vitamin mineral supplements, it's a double whammy. Does that make more sense?
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, cool.
It gives more bang to the buck.
Exactly. Yeah.
Turns up the dial.
Yeah. I mean, if you eat like a raccoon, you literally just eat whatever you can find and just, shove stuff into your gut and you're eating junk food. And, you're one of these people who just has a little regard for your health, and vagus nerve is going to do dick all. It's really not something that we want to look at as being a focus. But again, is it better than nothing? If you're eating fast food and taking multivitamins, it's better than eating fast food and not taking multivitamins. That's my take on that one. I just think there are often better priorities. So let's talk about that. I mean, how to fix a leaky gut, right? If you had a headache and that headache was because I'm sitting here hitting you in the head with a hammer, the best way to stop me or stop your headache is to stop me from hitting you in the head. And so if we've got a leaky gut because we're inflamed, we're doing things that are inflaming us, if we're eating things that we shouldn't be eating, if we're eating a lot of gluten and dairy or drinking alcohol, eating tons of sugars, these things are the first contributing factors. That's the hammer. So let's stop the insult right away. And so it actually breaks down to like a 5-step process I call the 5 R's of reversing gut disease. This is what I use in the Crohn's and colitis space. It's just a bit more nuanced, but it's the exact same. Whether somebody comes in with IBS or IBD, so irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease, it doesn't matter to me because it's all about finding the roots of severity. And I describe it this way. If you were walking in a pair of shoes, and you may have heard my analogy with this on my podcast before, if you're going for a walk in a brand new pair of shoes and you're not wearing any socks, what happens to your foot? It rubs and rubs until it gets blistered and it bleeds. And that's this wear and tear spectrum. Prime example, had a fella in 22 years old, started a new job, 2 months into his job. He just happened to be dealing with gut issues, went to his doctor, diagnosed with IBS. Is bloat, diarrhea, the works. 6 months after that, diagnosed with IBD, so inflammatory bowel disease. He has ulcerative colitis, proctitis. So the lower 15 centimeters of his rectum was inflamed and he was having ulceration and bleeding and mucus in his stool. And his doctor said, well, it's just genetic. Well, what we did, we figured out very quickly, his new job was HVAC. So he started a new job working in ventilation units. And so he didn't to wear his PPE. He was working in old homes and renos and new homes and whatever. I thought, well, it sounds like you have a mold infection. And so that was his hammer. We found that we did a test. We found the mold 10 weeks later, no colitis, no proctitis, no inflammation. He's completely healed and is never coming back because we took away the hammer. We removed the problem, right? And unfortunately, in a lot of ways, if you have leaky gut or have inflammation or have something, in the Western world, we're trained to go after symptoms. Where I have a headache, here's a headache pill, here's an aspirin. Well, a headache isn't an aspirin deficiency. A headache is there because there's inflammation or dilation of the blood vessels, which opens up and puts pressure inside your skull. If you're having asthma, it's not a puffer deficiency. It's inflammation in your lungs, making it hard to breathe. So why is it there? Right? If we went to the doctor, on a tangent now, but if you went to the doctor with a thorn in your hand and it was swollen and infected and it was bleeding and you couldn't move your hand and you go in and say, help me, and they give you ointment for the pain, you'd be really upset. Like, pull the thorn out. We can obviously see external inflammation. We can see the cause. But when it's inside in Western medicine, or if it's a chronic condition, we just say, oh, well, take some drugs. But what is the thorn? And that's where you have to remove the problem, be it a mold infection, be it food and nutrition or alcohol or sugar. And so that's the first thing to repairing a leaky gut is remove the problem. And oftentimes the body can probably heal itself. But the question is, what if it can't? What if you're lacking resources? And this is where the second R, we went through remove, the first R, the problem. The second R is to replenish nutrients. And so picture, Heather, you live on an acreage, okay? And you have a well for water. You have enough well water to bathe, to cook with, to do your dishes, just the basics you need to run the home, to shower and whatever else. Well, if your house is on fire and you need extra water, where does it come from? Well, you run out because you only have so much in storage until it can replenish itself. The same thing happens in the body. If you are inflamed, the same way your house would be on fire, get it, flames? I'm underappreciated. But if you have this inflammation, it's inflamed. And we look at this and go, okay, well, I need extra resources to put the fire out. Well, that's your vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. But if you have an inflamed gut, if you are bloated, if you're eating junk food, you're not getting those nutrients to replenish your well. They're not coming in. This is where vitamin mineral supplements can come in handy, right? If you're eating junk food, your food is void of nutrients. If you're inflamed, you're not breaking down, digesting, and absorbing nutrients to refill up your well. But to add insult to injury with modern farming, agriculture, and monocropping, our food, there was a study back from 2004 from the University of Texas, and they had found, based on whatever technology they were using at the time, that they approximated you would need 8 oranges to get the same nutrients that your great-grandmother would have gotten in one. Today, the argument is up to 20 oranges. So we arguably have 8 to 20 times less nutrients in our food than we did back 100, 200 years ago. And that's due to the cropping and farming, and we're not using regenerative agriculture. It's just dead dirt with fertilizer to hold a seed, and we're not getting nutrients. And so we have to replenish these nutrients oftentimes ourselves. And that's why vitamin and mineral supplements can be so beneficial. And so this is the process to repairing leaky gut. The first R is remove the problem. Then we have to replenish the nutrients. And then, of course, if we want to measure, we can rebuild that microbiome. We can see what's going on through, testing like GI mapping and stool testing. We have to repair the tissues. Remember, your house was on fire. You burned it down. You have to rebuild and repair. And then we have to rejuvenate the immune system. And this is effectively how we reverse the worst of the worst gut diseases. And leaky gut is just so low on the spectrum. It's really easy to do.
So, like we said earlier, this is a multifaceted, very individualized problem. What may be your hammer may not be my hammer.
Yes.
And you do have a 16-week program that I'll be sure to put in the show notes if someone is looking and is ready to tackle the root cause of some of their problems. But for just some of the general habits that we can do, you mentioned things like sugar, gluten, dairy. I loved this litmus test. If your great-great-grandmother didn't recognize it as food, don't eat it. And I'm doing a little mental check through my cupboard right now going, that's interesting.
It's a really easy way to check it off. Like, would it have existed 200 years ago? And we have to look at it statistically. I mean, even looking at inflammatory bowel disease. And for those who are listening who don't have Crohn's or colitis, it's okay. Again, this is the worst of the worst severity. And so if we can take the worst and use that as our litmus test, then we can use that to measure the severity or the frequency of other conditions. And so looking at IBD in the last 30 years, according to CDC's own data, back in 1990, depending on which studies you look at, there was a ballpark of 1.5 to 3 million cases worldwide actively being seen and treated by doctors of both Crohn's and colitis. In 2020, the last point the CDC published this data, it was north of 7 million. Estimates today in 24 are north of 8 million. So we've 5 or 6x'd our cases of bowel disease in 30 years. And we've had more diseases since the 1950s, higher rates of diabetes and obesity and Alzheimer's and all kinds since the 1950s. Which we have to look, what has been introduced from the 1950s onward to skyrocket diseases, to skyrocket chronic inflammatory conditions. Autoimmune diseases are on the rise faster than ever before in any time in history. But Western medicine goes, oh, well, we have a drug for that. I had a client of mine, she's a medical doctor out in Utah, and she was at a conference, 400 doctors in the room. And I'm not trashing doctors. I do trash the ideology that medical school teaches, though. I work with some amazing doctors. My career is where it is because of medical doctors. But there's an underlying ideology in Western medicine, unless it's broken out of us, that becomes very problematic. 400 doctors in the room. And this is back in 21, I believe. And they were talking about fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease being the number one cause or need for liver transplant by 2025. So clearly, like, more than alcoholism, more than trauma, more than autoimmune disease and cirrhosis and alcoholism, way above, it's a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which we know is caused by sugars and high fructose corn syrup like pops and junk and additives. And so they say, it's okay. There's this new drug coming out and here's how it works. And she's looking around the room, 400 doctors taking notes. She's like, puts her hand up. Are we not going to talk about diet? The thing that's causing the problem. It's okay. We have a drug for that. Medical school, they'll go through and, hey, here's hypertension. Here's how it works. Here's the pathology. They might talk about the deficiencies we get from nutrients and what can happen if your nutrition is imbalanced. But here's the drugs to fix those symptoms, not the nutrition itself. They're never looking at the hammer. They're looking to put Band-Aids on the skull. And that's a very bad way to look at medicine. And if we keep looking at healthcare this way, chronic inflammatory diseases like Crohn's and colitis will continue to proliferate. We've 5 to 7x'd our cases in 30 years. So if we got the worst of the worst in 30 years, what's the best of the best? Well, that's 72% of Americans dealing with gut issues, bloat, constipation, gas, diarrhea, leaky gut, and all kinds of other conditions. We have more Americans medicated now than any time in history. Upwards of 60, 70%, something like that. Don't quote me on the exact stats, but of American adults over 60 years old are on 3 or more prescription medications. I think it's 40% now are considered like obese. 60% are considered overweight. Pre-diabetes and diabetes combined, 12% are diabetic. Up to 40% are pre-diabetic. We have young Alzheimer's creeping in, autoimmune conditions, and it's all been in the last 50 years or so. We have to look at some of the roots, and we wait in Western medicine. We want to quantify everything. We want to measure. We want to classify. We want to look at, show me the study, show me the randomized controlled trials. Why? How many times does someone have to come to your house and things go missing before you stop inviting that person over to your house? Right? Like, why don't we just look at it and call a spade a spade? And this is our biggest downfall in Western culture is we're waiting to see the studies. By then it's too late.
Yeah. You talked about nutrition and medical school, and I don't have, listen, don't quote me on this stat either, but I have heard it's a teeny tiny bit of medical school, super small.
4 to 8 hours, depending on the school, out of 7 years of full-time work and schooling and clinical and all kinds. It's a shred. I mean, if you go to your average like nutritionist education, if you're going to go back to school, it's at minimum a year before you get licensed or certified even to be able to do any kind of working with clients. And so to look at medical school and they get 4 hours, but they're in charge for your health and your ultimate diseases. We have to remember, and again, not a bash to medical doctors, because again, my entire career is from medical doctors, but they're the ones who recognize the holes in the system. They are doctors of medicine. Ultimately, they are taught how to give medications. And we want to go down that rabbit hole. Who pays for med school? Who pays for the studies? Who pays for what gets taught and learned? Who lobbies and pays for medication to be pushed through? How many doctors do you know, if you've ever worked in a doctor's office, they go, oh yeah, we'll just use this drug now because the rep told me XYZ. It's a crazy system and a crazy game to play. And it grinds my gears, so many people living with these diseases, and so many doctors mean well. They go to school because they want to help people, or maybe they're in it because their parents made them go, who cares? But the idea is you're there because you believe you're going to do some good. And they come out oftentimes being the best pharmaceutical reps, not being taught how to actually fix conditions. I'm working with a 5-year-old boy right now, and he went to his doctor, and he was having a lot of diarrhea and gas and pain. He said IBS, similar to this first gentleman. A couple of weeks later, he went back with blood in his stool to diagnose him with IBD. He's 5. He was previously perfectly healthy. How do you go from healthy to sick? The math doesn't add up, right? You can't come home one day and your house be collapsed unless there was a major fire or an earthquake or something catastrophic had to happen. And so his doctor went, well, it's autoimmune, give him the drugs and he'll be on this for life now. Just classified it in this box. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, just like our earlier gentleman, he had a mold infection, ran a urine test. It made sense. He had siblings in the household. He's got 2 older sisters who are having behavioral issues and cognitive dysfunction and all kinds, mood swings. That can be a sign of mold infection. Mom was having an itchy, dry scalp. Dad had asthma. I think everybody's got a mold infection. Did a urine test. This kid's got 12 different strains of mold in his body. And so we have to look at these things as contributing factors or primary causes. And we just don't in the Western world. We go, here's your symptoms. That's what a diagnosis really is. We look at it and go, here are your symptoms. The quote, diagnosis is the word. It's the one word that we use that any clinician or medical professional can look at in an instant, know exactly what's going on. Okay, you have Crohn's or colitis or IBS or bloat or whatever it is, GERD, acid reflux, great. With that, here's the medication we give, 1, 2, 3 in that order. Full stop. There's no exploration, minimal. They might go in and look at a stool test. Do you have like E. coli or varicella, salmonella, basic stuff? They're not looking at the other 100 trillion bacteria inside of your gut that weighs 3 to 5 pounds in the average adult. They're not looking at toxins and infections and imbalances. It's so easy to reverse things like Crohn's and colitis. And those are the worst of the worst. How easy can it be to fix your bloat, constipation, diarrhea, acid reflux if you just look for the root cause?
And Josh, I'm going to guess that a lot of those tests that you were talking about are not tests that the Western doctrine, again, hey, Western medicine has its place. It's had its place in my life and my family's life. But when we talk about something like this, and you think about some of the things that are going on historically with how our food is being grown, who's paying for what studies, you have to bring that critically thinking mind, which my audience has, and go, hang on a second. Maybe there's something else going on here. How would someone get these tests?
So this is a big bummer because a lot of doctors don't know them, don't recognize them, don't know what they are. There's all kinds of stuff. And so if we look at this, break it down, you have to go to a private clinician or practitioner. If you're in the health space, if you're a medical doctor, even a nutritionist, a lot of these places you can go and get them yourself, but you have to create a practitioner's account. And so they do need permission and a clinician to do. And so looking at it, how do you get these tests? You have to see somebody, but your medical doctor, 1, doesn't often know what they are, 2, where to get them, 3, how to read and interpret, 4, let alone what to do with it after we get the interpretation, because it's medication or it's nothing. It's pharmaceuticals or none. And so these tests, oftentimes, again, you have to pay out of pocket. I had a client who came in to see me. She had a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, and her doctor said it was moderate to severe. So we should really deal with this. We had her in for 12 weeks, Heather. 12 weeks. Not everybody's that quick. Some people are a couple of weeks. Some people are a couple of months. To prevent relapses, we recommend at least 4 months of consistent work and then, of course, years of upkeep. But she came in after 12 weeks, no Crohn's disease whatsoever, gone. They did a CT enterography, so a full scan of her intestines, nothing. They scoped her, nothing, no signs, no symptoms, no disease. If you just looked at her and met her as a first-time doctor or clinician, you'd never know she had any gut issues. And her doctor looks at her chart, she goes, well, I'm glad you're feeling better, but I'd like you on Entyvio. Well, Entyvio is a biologic medication. It's an immunosuppressive drug. So it suppresses your immune system. They use these because you're inflamed, right? Which is your immune system reacting, trying to heal you. And the inflammation from the immune system causes the pain and the symptoms. So they just suppress it so your symptoms go away, right? It's like you got a hostage in your living room, you put tape over their mouth, they're still not happy to be there. They would still very much like to leave. And so just because you can't hear them doesn't mean they're happy. But that's what we do to the body. We just put tape over the mouth. And so you get these people in, and she looked at her doctor and she goes, well, here's what I did. Here's my stool sample, my GI map. Here's my protocol, and my Crohn's is gone. She goes, well, I'm not interested in seeing that. I'd like you to try the Entyvio. She goes, great. I'm not interested in your Entyvio. So the doctor looked at her chart and said, you have Crohn's. And under the guise with this preconceived notion that it's irreversible, it's autoimmune, it's a lifelong condition, nothing can be done, you have to be on drugs. Otherwise, if you deny the drugs, they write a non-compliant in your chart. And so when you come in to see, I've literally had clients get fired by their doctor. Don't come back and see me if you're not going to listen to me, who were getting better, not listening to their doctor, because so much more can be done. And so even in the Western world, the best of the best will look at this and go, yeah, well, you should just, because it's tunnel vision. And this is where it gets really, really tricky and really challenging for people to advocate for themselves. So sometimes you have to go and speak to someone else like myself. If you guys are listening to me like, this dude's personality is the worst, that's fine. Go see somebody else, I don't care. But you can get testing done from functional practitioners all over the place. It's not hard to access. You just have to know. I get people all the time asking, well, can I just do a test? Can I just get a GI map? I'm like, theoretically, yes. But it's like, can you just get blueprints drawn up for your house? Yes. Do you need an engineer, a plumber, an electrician, an architect, a designer? Do you need people to come in and drywall and framers? Like, you need people and experts in their field to complete the project. So you can go and get a test done ultimately, sure, 100%. But unless you want to spend the next 3 to 5 years, like dedicating yourself to just these specific skill sets to learn them, to fix it yourself, just go pay a practitioner to do it for you. On the other hand, if you want to learn, and this is something you're passionate about, come to see me. I might be hiring by the time you hear this.
I think this audience can really appreciate being an expert. They're becoming experts in their field, so they understand when someone's an expert, that is the quickest way to get the answers that you need. And when you're in a doctoral program, or maybe you're listening to this and you're not, but you're under chronic stress, being healthy, having things like a stable mood, focus, good sleep, just makes the entire experience of being in a human body more enjoyable. And in the end, that's kind of the goal, isn't it?
So much. I mean, if you want your brain to work, your gut has to work. 90% of your neurotransmitters are made inside of your gut. 70 to 90% of your immune system comes from your gut. If your gut's not healthy, right, your factory's falling apart, your production is not going to be the same. If your assembly line is all jacked up, your end result's not going to be the same. Your gut, it's an assembly line in a factory that produces all kinds of stuff and neurotransmitters. If it's all jacked up, your end result, it's not going to be very good. You're going to have a brain with ADHD, focus issues. You're going to have inflammation. You're going to have depression or anxiety. You're going to have really bad PMS symptoms that are so distracting you're on the couch for 3 days out of every month. It all comes back to the gut. Everything can be tied back to the gut. And if we're not taking care of that, what are we doing?
Josh, I've enjoyed just sitting here and listening to all the information that you've been giving me, but I have on my notes, I wanted to ask you about the relationship between stress and the gut, because obviously my audience tends to be more stressed than the average individual. And what do you have to say about that?
Boy, we're going to have to make this one a two-parter.
Okay. Well, why don't you just give us a teaser?
Sure.
And if you're willing, I can have you back.
I would love to. It'd be an honor. So here's what we say about stress in the gut. Stress upsets the assembly line, right? Henry Ford got famous not for the motor car, but for the assembly line. And so the assembly line is ultimately the tool that produces the byproducts we want. Stress mangles that assembly line. Number one, increases in cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It's a great hormone, but in excessive amounts, it's problematic. It can contribute to wear and tear of your gut lining, right? Back to the sock and the shoe analogy of wearing your heel thin till it bleeds. That gut lining, that mucosal layer, is your sock. And so if that's worn down, your heel, the tissue itself, the stomach, the intestines are more prone to issues. This is where we get things like gastritis, people dealing with issues in their stomach, or inflammation. It's a wear and tear. And so number two, stress slows down your assembly line. And so if you have some places that are working adequately and some that are not, you're going to have a bad end product. Number three, digestion gets all messed up because you have two basic modes. You have rest and digest and fight and flight. If you're not in rest and digest, you're in fight or flight. Now, again, it's a spectrum. It's more like a volume knob up or down. But if you're more towards the fight and flight side, you're not producing digestive enzymes, you're not producing stomach acid, your motility is screwed up. So you're not breaking down, digesting, and absorbing. Back to nutrient deficiencies, undigested food in the stool. You're getting inflammation throughout the gut. It's like picture, like you need tiny, tiny things to be moving through your intestines. They should be broken down. Like if you put Godzilla in a kindergarten class, it's not going to be a very good time. He's too big for a small area. Maybe not one of my better analogies today, but you get the idea that there's things that are undigested coming through. If you have loose bowels and undigested food in your stool, if you're looking, like you can see whole pieces of broccoli or whole pieces of carrots or pieces of meat shreds, you're clearly not digesting. If you take capsules and you see them in the toilet, your transit time is rapid and there's no digestion. And that can be a factor of stress and many other things. So we have to look at these from many different aspects and many different lenses, right? Everything in the body is a stressor. Stress is everything. In fact, I define stress as any system or any process, any usage of excess resources. Technically, digesting food is a stressor because it requires calories, it requires energy and resources for your body to digest. Technically, sleep is a stressor because it requires chemicals and hormones to be produced to put you to sleep. It's the very low end of the spectrum compared to the death of a loved one or a pet or something else or a trauma, but they're all stressors on a spectrum. And just to differentiate Western medicine, we're always black and white. We do it with politics, we do it with medicine, we do it with food. This is good, this is bad, this is whatever. But stress is a spectrum. Inflammation and gut issues are a spectrum of severity. And so we look at it this way and go, okay, well, it's a wear and tear process. We have to understand that stress, if you're somebody who's in medical school or a doctorate program, you're overexerting, over-exercising, you're over this, over that, you are not eating very well, inflammation, there's stress. You're not getting sleep, there's stress. You're drinking on the weekends, it's stress. If you're exercising, especially like strength training or high intensity interval workouts or burst exercises, these are high level stressors, which all tax the nervous system and all kinds, contributing to further stressors in the body. Everything is stress. So how do we mitigate and manage that in the right ways? And that's very important to understand.
And would I be right in assuming your 16-week program includes stress as a component?
In a way. So we do talk about it for individuals. So our 16-week program for those dealing with Crohn's and colitis, we cover all the bases they need. Everything is customized. It's not like a course where you just go in and DIY. Crohn's and colitis is very nuanced. And so we have to go in and figure out the individual, like what's their hammer? What's the thing hitting them in the head? And so we create everything around that. If stress is a large part of that for you, we do. Now, I'm not a stress expert per se. I'm not a counselor. If there's somebody dealing with PTSD, I do outsource those types of things. If it's basic exercises, box breathing or, cold dips or humming exercises or something you can do to tone that vagus nerve, for example. If it's getting you to listen to music or giving you some basic coping strategies, sure, we can help with some of that. But if it's really extreme stuff, it's not what I can do. But our job in these 16-week programs is to find what's your biggest hammer? What's the thing that's hurting you? How do we remove that safely? How do we get your body to replenish and restore and all these different things, a part of the 5 R's? And so it's a customized process for sure.
Which makes sense given the issue at hand. Now, before we started recording, you mentioned you just came out with something brand new. Would you like to explain that to the listeners?
I am very excited about this one. So there are some people dealing with Crohn's and colitis who sometimes need a very easy solution. There are some people dealing with, other gut issues that don't need a full custom program. They just need the basics. And so there is a brand new platform out called School. That's SKOL, clearly too cool for school. But this program here, it's fantastic. It's the perfect hybrid between like a Facebook community page or like a forum and a course. And it's just absolutely fantastic. And so we just launched this recently. Anyway, I'm going to get off on a tangent. So I'm going to keep this one short for you guys, but check it out. It's on the website. There'll be a tab there for School where you can go and see it for yourself and see what we have available. If you do not have Crohn's and colitis, it's okay. We won't exclude you. Because we help the worst of the worst, we can help you too by using the same principles that we use for Crohn's and colitis. And you'll get a lot more results, a lot faster by doing something like this than you would if you are somebody who's very severe. And of course, you guys can always reach out if you do have Crohn's and colitis very severe and you don't want kind of a DIY community style program. You want something very custom and much faster, much more direct. So you're figuring out less. We're doing it for you. Of course, you can find us on the website as well.
And Josh, your website is?
That is great at marketing, hey? Great coach, bad marketer. That is gutsolution.ca up here in Canada. That's gutsolution, all singular, .ca.
And of course, I'll have those links in the show notes as well. But Josh, as we're wrapping up this episode that was so much fun, and I'm very grateful that you've agreed to come back and we can dig deeper into that whole stress topic. But how about ending today with some final words of wisdom for the audience?
I think the best thing I can say to you guys is don't identify with a diagnosis. I see it more so in the Crohn's colitis community or severe communities, people with MS or, diabetes or IBD or whatever it is. We take these diagnoses, we can identify with them. I see in my community all the time, like these Crohn's colitis warrior t-shirts. And it's great that we can find meaning and purpose in it, but once you identify with it, it's hard to shake. Once you accept the fact that a diagnosis is what it is, then we just accept it's forever. Everything has a cause and effect. A diagnosis is just a word to describe symptoms. It had to happen somehow. It's not because God hates you. It's not because you're unlucky. It's not just genetic. I hear all the time, well, it's just genetic. Bull. Genetics load the gun. Something has to pull the trigger. If you have a genetic issue, thyroid runs in my family, arthritis runs in my family, whatever it is, it does not. Your genetics dictate that you are genetically prone to expressing inflammation through this pathway, but it does not guarantee you. My sister-in-law, asthma runs in the family. She's got a mold infection. So it's mold causing her asthma. So your genetics do not mean what you think they mean. Everything is reversible. Every condition has a root cause. We just have to find it.
Josh, just listening to you speak is so empowering. Thank you so much for being on today's show, and I can't wait to have you back.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me express just simply medical logic.
Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, if you're looking for more ways to invite joy in your journey, check out the free resources at expandyourhappy.com. You'll find downloads like an article I wrote titled The Doctoral Journey, 12 Things You Need to Know That They Probably Won't Tell You. You'll also find a PDF that organizes all podcasts by the 7 steps detailed in the Happy Doc Student Handbook, which you can also find on the website. Finally, if you're looking for Happy Doc Student swag, I've got that too. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and if you want to make my day, rate and review so that together we can change the way doctoral education is delivered and experienced. Hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.